pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. For attendance, we are all here except one is missing on vacation.
Call the public hearing to order.
Yes, I was just.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Paul, we're not playing with the lights tonight. All right, so now I need a motion to recuse our meeting, or to recess our meeting.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, I call this public hearing to order. I have to read the notice. This is not the full one. Here's the full one. Sorry.
The advantages of paper.
I don't have a printer at home. And I have no way of printing it here either.
We have one at the library.
Helpful as always, Paul.
All right. The Charter Revision Commission will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, March 3rd, 2020 at 7 p.m. at the East Windsor Town Hall. The purpose of this hearing is to obtain public input and comments on the East Windsor Charter. Copies of the East Windsor Charter are available at the Town Clerk's office and on East Windsor website, www.eastwindsor-ct.gov. East Windsor Charter Commission, signed by Jason Bowser, 2/25/20. So, I will, kind of our process for the charter is that we need to have the public hearing in order for us to start working on it. So I will open the public hearing for public input and discussion. So please raise your hand, state your name and address for the record, and Paul Anderson.
Paul Anderson, 89 Main Street, Broadbrook. Okay. I'm very happy that we have a charter revision commission organized. I'll make a suggestion that we do this on a more frequent periodic basis so we can actually accomplish things. So the simplicity I'd like to see come out of this commission is to address the 2% budget problem, call it a day, and have another revision commission down the road to deal with other issues. That's just my suggestion. There you are.
Sarah.
First, I'd like to thank all of you for volunteering. I really appreciate the time that you're going to be spending going forward in the next few months addressing the needed changes to the charter. I'd like to echo Mr. Anderson with the 2%. It's really been hindering our community and hindering the growth. If you're not going to address the 2%, I would recommend that you take a look at separating the debt services budget and the CIP budget from the 2% cap. It's hindering our ability to be able to bond at this time. Not sure if you're aware, but the current projects that we have on the table that the CIP committee has looked at, we can't actually look at bonding until 2026 because the 2% cap really is, really holding us back. So I just hope that you'll take a look at that. And thank you.
Kathy?
I echo Sarah's thoughts on the thank yous. I appreciate your time. She also stole my thunder a little bit, so there's three things I wanted to talk to you about. The first is the time allotted in the charter for the CIP to get the projects that the town departments provide, and the time where we're supposed to turn it back to the Board of Selectmen, which I believe is November 1st. I think the projects need to be turned in mid-September, and then we have until the 1st of November to get it back out. And given that we can have up to 9 people on the board, and typically, at least as long as I've ever been on it, which is probably 5 or 6 years now anyway, just about everybody on the board is on other boards. So trying to coordinate all of those schedules and get all of that work done and allow everybody to be there, to be part of the decision-making process, and not having to say, well, I'm sorry you can't make it, but you're in the minority, so we're going to have to go ahead without you. It's best if we can all be there, and it's really hard to get it done in that time. And I think November 1st is pretty early in terms of when the Board of Selectmen actually starts looking at stuff. So I would hope that maybe we could push it out at the far end, because starting September 15th for projects that aren't coming for another year and a half is an awful long way out to already be planning. I wouldn't want to push our departments into trying to plan for that any earlier. The second thing I wanted to ask you to look at was the bonding as well, bonding and debt service. This year we were provided, well, I can tell you the total. This year the requests to CIP, the total project costs were almost $10 million. Pretty sure that's the bottom line number. And the bonding projects alone, the things that we realized that we could not possibly support in the small amount of money that we get annually, there were 5 projects, and their total was almost $6 million, $5.7 million. And that includes things like a fire truck. And I know Warehouse Point is now looking for a fire truck as well. So we need 2 fire trucks in town. They're about $1 million a piece, give or take, at least the one Broadbrook was looking for. Roof replacements at 1, 2, 3 different buildings in town need to be done. All have damage. And the longer we wait, the more that damage grows. And, you know, and various other facility improvements or maintenance. At this point, they're all maintenance. But we can't do that, as Sarah said, because of although we have a good debt ratio and theoretically we could get the bonding, the problem is the 2% cap prevents us from being able to bond enough to make it worth the cost of what you have to pay to bond until 2026. So we're just going to sit and let things deteriorate until 2026, unless something happens. And the third thing is the dreaded 2%. So I know our new elected officials all want to try to increase revenue and bring revenue to town, bring new business into town. Well, you could triple the revenue in the town, and we still have a 2% budget cap. So no matter what you bring in, we can't grow this town and we can't fix the things we need to fix until we fix the 2% budget cap. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Bob Leach, 39 Church Street, and I'm just going to reiterate what Kathy said, what Sarah said, what Paul said, and especially about the capital and the debt service, removing those from the 2%. I think at very least that's something we should look at. But I would throw out another idea, and I think it was Paul that originally came up with this. Rather than the 2%, and I know probably the voters are going to see the 2% as something they're not going to support, removing it, but maybe go the other way. What was it, Kathy? Yeah. Maybe go the other way, 8% or 10%. So just a thought. But if you want to get some people in here that actually vote for that budget and pass that budget, if you put it at a 10%. Plus last year's, I'm pretty sure you're going to get people in here to vote for that budget.
You'll get a lot more people at the polls, but which way they vote remains to be seen, but you'll get a lot of people at the polls.
Alan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, actually, it did occur to me today that, as I was thinking about this meeting, we have to do this every 5 years, but we can do it as often as we feel we need to. So I would just suggest, as Paul says, keep it simple, resist the urge to fix everything, or resist the request to fix everything. Keep it at 3 to 5 questions, I would think, and we can do this again next year if we needed to, or wanted to, more than 2 years, you know.
Okay.
Baby steps
Yes.
might be a little more successful.
Anyone else? Jason?
Jason Bowser, 121 East Road. I think it's, at least amongst the folks in the room, it's pretty widely agreed that the current 2% circumstance is, as written, is a problem. So as you take a look at Section 8 of the charter, I'll throw out some other options that could be considered in no particular order and with no preference for one or the other. Rather than have it be a 2% spending increase, it could be a 2% tax increase, which is a different number. And that at least allows for consideration in growth in the grand list. You could index it. You could index it to whatever the state spending level is. You could index it to an average of the 5 most similar municipalities in terms of population in the grand list of the town of East Windsor, which is available through CROG and through CCM. You could, as has been mentioned, you could consider a different number other than a 2% number, which I think was pretty arbitrary when it went in. You could carve out the capital and the debt service from the 2% rule. You could do any of these things or all of these things, or any other thing, and think about really do a deep dive and think about how a different system might be more beneficial towards moving the town in a positive direction. We have spent a lot of time, not just in the last 4 years, not just in the last 10 years, but really over 20 years or more, spending the limited resources we have on trying to catch up on things. And we have not spent really any effort at all on those things that make a town a community. And so by addressing the Section 8 of the charter and allowing us every now and again to do something good for us instead of just the things that we need to do, but things that make us an attractive place to raise a family, that would go a long way towards growing East Windsor. I would also caution that as we look to expand our tax base, by inclusion of new companies coming into town or companies that are here expanding, there is still a need for some degree of stability from their perspective so that the waters remain calm and we don't have draconian spikes and falls that make it difficult for businesses to operate themselves. So as you think about whatever options are considered and recommended, keep that perspective in mind too, that there is a need for some degree of stasis, but still allowing for those things that the town needs to provide for, and that we all want to provide for.
Thank you. Anybody else? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the public hearing.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We'll entertain a motion to reconvene our regular meeting.
Just reconvene.
reconvene
Okay, reconvene. Okay. So we need to approve our meeting minutes from February 11th. Is there a motion to approve those meeting minutes?
My name was like really butchered. If we could get that fixed, that'd be awesome. I will. Too.
Okay. Yours too?
Mine too.
Okay. Any other corrections? All right.
No.
She also didn't know us at the time either.
I didn't.
I hadn't met her before. Was there a motion for that? Who made the motion?
Motion to accept the minutes as amended. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Now we have public participation. Any input from the public? Okay, we will move on to old business, which is just reviewing the charter. This is our second meeting, so from our first meeting, Jason had printed off the charter for all of us. Hopefully we have all read it and made notes on everything, so let's just do a simple walkthrough of everything for corrections. Let's see, what are my notes? One of my things was, do we have like the original date of this charter that just has like the revised dates? I don't know if we had like an original.
They have them. The town clerk, I had her years ago go back a few, I don't know if I still have them, but it looks different each time they've revised it. So to find an original, the town clerk, I think, has quite a few years back.
Okay, because I feel like we should have that somewhere.
Well, it's just what you see, and just because I've read them.
Yeah.
Is it's just updating a lot of changes, like when they changed the first selectmen's terms.
Yep.
The change of this 2% coming on instead of, I think it was Board of Selectmen originally made the final decision if it didn't get, I mean, there's been some changes over the years, but for the most part, it's, you know, the selectmen, town meeting form of government, and, you know, adjustments. I mean, I certainly think you should read them, but there's a lot, there's like 9 or 10 that I've read in the past, and I don't think they can find the oldest ones.
Okay.
Something about the state not being able to locate them, or, I mean, you'd have to check with the town clerk.
Okay. All right, so just kind of walking through, does anybody have anything on the first couple of pages, or?
Well, the first charge we had was to clean up, and I forgot my minutes, so I can't say exactly how Jason put it at our last.
The chart is on our
The he,
agenda.
she, use the pronouns, the
Yeah, I
technical.
mean, can we just go ahead and work on that first? That's the most simplest, and,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if we have any real disagreement. I certainly would turn to Rick and say, your experience, is there anything in there we should worry about doing it that way, or?
Well, that's an easy thing to do. But I think more important is that all of us as members of the commission get a sense of the layout of the charter
Okay.
and the various sections. I would choose to do, for example, section 1 is pretty boilerplate stuff.
Right.
It's the rights of the town, the legal justification for having a charter, and where the charter gets its authority from.
Right.
And that pretty much summarizes it.
And how do we want to do it in terms of the technicalities? Do we want to just have 2 people from the board volunteer to go through looking for the grammatical?
I've already done that. I've already found typos and things like that in there. So I've listed those. They're all simple. They're missing.
All right, because I didn't really want to worry about that. I wanted to worry about the 2%, so.
Yeah,
okay.
I looked at that one as I was reading through. I just jotted notes down and stuff. So,
Okay.
I mean, certainly another pair of eyes would help, but I think I've got the majority of them. Jason?
Did I send you the charter electronically?
No.
I didn't
But
send it to you in Word?
No.
I didn't send it to you in Word yesterday?
I don't think so.
So what might be helpful is to work off of one red line document rather than having multiple copies that need to be ultimately compiled together.
Send me anything.
Okay.
Yes, so if we get that, I can put it into my Google Doc that I have that I've shared with everybody, I think. That's where I've been taking all my notes, that's where all the agendas are that I make and all that stuff. So if that works for everybody, we can just kind of share that, and I'll mark that up and put all the typo corrections that I have in it, and then we can work off of that as we go through this process. Perfect.
So the section 1, you would say, is basically boilerplate. There's nothing really to, I mean, I didn't see.
Personally, I don't see anything.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to kind of lead us through this, since you have the most experience with this?
If you'd like me to.
I would love you to.
Chapter 2 deals with elections. It talks about terms of office, talks about the composition of the elected officials, who's eligible to vote. Again, unless we're looking to do a major overhaul of the charter, I don't see anything in here that,
Yeah. I don't
I'd
think
agree
so.
with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's nothing about the CIP in there that was mentioned during the public hearing, but I think we probably should look at that, but that's not part of that.
no.
Yeah. that's the
Okay.
next section.
Sorry, I didn't mark down what section number I read that.
That's okay.
It's all right, it makes us pay attention, so.
I think it's in 8, but I'm
think
not
it's in
100% sure.
I think it is too.
Yeah.
Chapter 3, duties of elected town officers, boards, and commissions. What's your pleasure?
Nothing jumped out at me, so I mean, I think that to keep things simple, that nothing needs to be changed on that one, from my perspective.
It seems to be working the way it is right
Yeah.
now, right?
As far as I know,
Yeah.
and I think we're all on several boards and commissions, so.
Board of Selectmen. Composition of the Board of Selectmen. Currently, first selectman, deputy first, and 3 other selectmen. It's in keeping with the town meeting first selectman form. Again, if we're looking to do, basically, we're gonna look at what we've discussed and what we're charged with, is to look at chapter 8 and other things that may come up. I don't have any concerns with this section.
Anyone else? All right.
It's all the emergency powers and all that sort of thing. Vacancies in the board. And let's see. The first selectman is the next section. First selectman has all the powers and duties of chief executive and chief administrative officer of the town. It's responsible for just about everything in town. For the care and maintenance of buildings, properties, personal property, for the supervision of staff, for hiring with the approval of the Board of Selectmen in many cases. Are there any questions or concerns on the powers and duties of the first selectman?
I didn't have anything.
I think it's important to point out that the first selectman, while operating as the chief executive and administrative officer, there's been some confusion, so I thought we pointed out tonight. It says with the approval of the Board of Selectmen. So it's very important people to understand that the first selectman, he's in charge of the day-to-day and he'll be the face of the community, et cetera, but it's the entire Board of Selectmen that run our town. And I think that's what this sets forth right there.
Yep.
An important distinction. We could be done in 2 weeks. Appointed officials. The town can establish town departments and agencies. Um, Now we move right into the town council and director of health. Director of health is normally a regional agency. Town council is typically appointed by the board of selectmen. Been through that discussion extensively over the last couple of years. And the things required of the town council are typically those assigned to the town's legal advisor. Any questions there? Any concerns? Any? Town engineer? Next item is the town treasurer. On this one, we might have some discussion about a reorganization of the department. And certainly, we want to get feedback from the Board of Selectmen. There's a lot of talk about the treasurer being renamed the finance director. It's my opinion that if we do rename the treasurer the finance director and accord the appropriate authority to the position, that we reorganize to put other town personnel under the supervision of the finance director. And the finance director would be the direct report to the first selectman, and others reporting to the town, to the finance director, would include the town treasurer, who could be the same person. The tax collector, the assessor, and I might leave it at that, but I mean, it's an item for discussion. If we believe we're at a point where a town finance director is appropriate, then I don't see just changing the title without changing the responsibilities that go with it. And personally, I would change it to finance director, and I would put the other departments under that finance director.
Query for you. Right now, in discussing this matter, because my concern has to deal with when you put something in the charter, that's it, you're done, you gotta obey it. And my understanding, and I could certainly be wrong, is that the finance director could be a job description which the person knows they're going to assume the duties of the town treasurer, and that if the job description from the Board of Selectmen, when they hire this person, stipulates who reports to them. In other words, the Board of Selectmen can, I don't know what the term is, not give their power, but allow whatever department you're talking about to report directly to the finance. I mean, I think that's something that, and we can argue over this later on. It's not something we have to do tonight. I'm just saying I'm not interested as much as, I think maybe having a finance director would be a great idea for the town. I just don't know if it's got to be in the charter.
Well, currently the way the charter's written, the treasurer, the tax collector, the assessor, all report to the first selectman. So if you want a different organizational structure, you might want to put it in the charter. You'd at least have to change where it says the town treasurer shall report to the first selectman, or the tax collector shall report to the first selectman. You might want to change that at a minimum to or his or her designee.
That might, yeah, I get you, that would work with me. That would allow the
That's a
flexibility without tying us into doing anything other than making sure we have a treasurer that's, can handle that aspect.
And that, again, if that's where the commission wants to go and that ends up being agreeable to the Board of Selectmen, that'd be fine. But I think if you really want to reflect what your actual structure is and what you want for a more contained structure, then you put it in the charter.
Okay. Well, let's discuss that later, because I'm sure.
That's an item we can,
Yeah.
we can just tag for
Yeah,
discussion.
absolutely.
Then it has the town clerk and other appointed officials. In a lot of modern charters, those positions may be outlined in the charter, but the actual organization of it is often left out of the charter so that it doesn't stop a future Board of Selectmen from reorganizing to what they find to be a more efficient structure down the road. Anyway.
No, that makes sense.
Kind of with that, is that language that you're talking about with the modern stuff, is that in that link that you had told us about the first night? Okay.
Boards, authorities, commissions, and associations. Simply allowing giving the authority to establish appropriate boards, commissions by town meeting or ordinance. Lays out some of the terms, lays out some of the, in the case of appointed boards, and that it tells how long they can last, the duration, some basic issues of the composition of a board or commission. Talks about single purpose and somewhere in here. Talks about appointments and removal. And it talks about filling vacancies. Any comments on that?
No.
Talks about the records they're required to keep. Lists several required appointed boards and commissions. One might want to consider renaming the Elderly Commission. Call it Senior Services, maybe. I kind of resent the elderly designation.
What do you say? What do you say?
Use the okay.
Anything else in that section anybody wants to raise?
Nope. As long as that list hasn't changed. Actually, I don't think it has. There hasn't been anything new added or anything taken away, so I think it's comprehensive.
Now we get to section 8. For purposes of tonight, let's skip section 8 for the moment.
Okay.
Go to section 9, chapter 9. Chapter 9, personnel regulations, collective bargaining. The exception of the removal of the Board of Ed from being covered under this. Nothing really in there.
Can I raise a point on section 9.3, which is, hang on a second.
You should waive the rule. If there's no exception, if there's no objection, we'll waive the rules. Do you hear from Jason?
I'm an ex officio member.
Okay.
I misspoke. It's section 9.2. All employees are at-will employees by definition. If employment contracts are issued, there shall be a term limitation of 3 years, and all contracts must be approved by the Board of Selectmen. Financial consideration will be determined on the basis of annual budget and performance. Contract law trumps charter, and contract law can exceed 3 years. So I would just, I'm not suggesting that that is something that has to be changed. I am suggesting it's something that's not currently binding. It's something that is generally adhered to, but not in all cases. So that might be something to at least have discussion about at a point in time.
What's the contract law? What's the other number you said in 3 years?
It's open, it's whatever the contracting authority sets. Going far enough back in history, there's a reason that's in there, but it's not binding.
Well, and that ties your hands in negotiations because you can only negotiate a 3-year contract, correct?
Yeah, and when you're 2 years out of contract or a year out of contract, that 3-year term sneaks up on you real quick.
Well, you might be better off with a 5-year contract with certain negotiations, or less, I'm just saying.
I think, well, something for you all to consider, but from my perspective, having some limited experience with this now, it would be helpful to have that tool in the toolbox.
So just make a note of that, we should come back to
Yep.
that and maybe look at it where it says 3 to 5 years or something to allow some negotiating room for them.
Chapter 10, town meeting. Deals with how special town meetings can be called by the Board of Selectmen, by petition. What can be dealt with at special town meetings.
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion recently about the amount of people you needed for a petition to have a special town meeting. And I've always felt that since the main legislative body of the town is a town meeting, that if 20 voters actually get together and petition, and, you know, they should be able to do it. You know, there was talk of a percentage or numbers of people, and I figure if you get 20 voters that are upset enough to put their name on something, there should at least be a meeting about it.
Yep.
Doesn't mean it's gonna be voted in or what, but it should be discussed by the legislative body.
It also calls out the provisions for a referendum requiring 200 signatures of qualified electors.
Right. I mean, that's really there, so if the voters feel they need to have recourse over decisions that have been made, they have a way to do it, and you don't want to block people from being able to do that kind of thing.
At the same time, you want there to be a substantial question
Yeah.
Right.
so that it can generate a significant number of signatures to require a referendum.
For a referendum, I agree. I'm just saying that I don't think 200 for a referendum's unreasonable either. That's a sizable amount of the actual people that vote.
Morning, Sean.
Any other questions on that section? Yeah, it's pretty much in keeping with the standard town meeting for selectmen for.
Right.
And then general, you have a conflict of interest, disclosure of conflicts, and prohibition on the Board of Finance not being an appointed town or elected town officer or official or employee, except for the pension one. Chapter 12 is transfer of power. Oh,
Yes, Jason?
yeah.
Given, I think that section might warrant some consideration. Recently, there was a longstanding member of multiple boards and commissions that was appointed to the Board of Finance. I don't see a conflict there between somebody serving on that board and others. So you might consider doing a deeper dive on that, maybe qualifying it in some way that there are some exceptions beyond the pension board to that. I don't really see what the conflict would be between the American Heritage River Commission and the Board of Finance. And I think that in the modern era, when there's so much difficulty in any aspect of getting volunteers to volunteer for things, barring somebody without cause or merit seems to be cutting off our nose to spite our face. But I could be wrong. So I would, if you guys had an opinion on that, that might be something that could be an improvement.
The rest of the charter is saving clauses, continuation, and that sort of thing. Brings us to Chapter 8.
The dreaded chapter. The dreaded, yes. The beast.
So, what kind of areas does the commission want to explore?
Well, what section is the specific 2% in? I do not remember.
8-4.
4, okay.
Page 41 of it.
8.5.
8.5, excuse me.
8, number 4.
We were close. It's on page 41, I know that much.
Oh, yes, the one I started. Why don't we?
So the first question becomes, do we want to continue with the 3 referendum approach?
Okay, so what are the other options if we don't do the 3 votes?
None, 1, 2. I don't think anybody's looking to do a
So
radical
basically,
change, but you
Unlimited
can
or
go 2
limited?
referendums, you can go 3, you can go 1, you can go unlimited.
Right, which I don't want to do. I'm not
Well,
suggesting
no.
that.
Okay?
So in communities that don't have a mandated cap on the number of questions, they do have unlimited referenda on that question. And There have been circumstances in other communities where adoption of a municipal budget has not happened before the start of the fiscal year in July. It may have been in August, it may have been in October, it may have been in November. What happens in those cases is the tax levy from the previous year remains, and the adjustment is made up in the second tax bill of the year. So there is a mechanism that is widely used in state law to accommodate for that. The reason that that 3 and out rule was put in place to begin with is so that the town departments would have an opportunity to put what would become the final new tax bill in place in the people's budgets for July 1st. I believe we are a significant outlier by having that provision in there in comparison to other communities in the state. But it has an upside as much as a downside.
Right, the unlimited causes
Yeah.
an image, whether or not a perception of instability.
Yeah, I was not
So I'm
suggesting that.
I'm not with the unlimited.
Yeah,
I mean,
agree.
I think 3 has worked well in the past. We actually have passed budgets at 3.
Yep.
I think the problem with the 2% is people focus on a 2% and not on the reality of, do we need this? Can this make the quality of life better? And so they're not really looking at, we have budgets that have lines and lines and lines of information. And I don't think most people look at them. I know if I didn't have to at some point, I wouldn't have. So, I mean, that's where, and the 2% in my mind is just, somebody said it arbitrary. I think they plucked it out of the air. I'm not a fan of one way or another of gauging it, but I think to base it on, there was a couple of suggestions of index the state spending, I mean, or maybe even, I don't know the answer. I just know having that thing there, it really isn't accomplishing what it set out to accomplish, which I think was to control taxes. And I think instead what it's done is it's like we're hearing from CIP, they don't have enough money because the 2%, they're affected by that. So if we could make it so they're not affected by an arbitrary number, but a real number of some sort. I mean, dealer's choice as far as where we get it from. But it also could be a reflection of the economy. If the economy's not good and it's a negative, I mean, there comes a point where you got to look at the flip side of using a real number, because once we put it in the charter, something happens and that number goes the other way, then that would have to be acceptable. But again, it's like putting a 10%. If that happens, it's like putting it out at 10%. People are going to pay attention.
Yeah.
So I'm not as concerned.
I would suggest we ask the treasurer/finance director to run a number of scenarios and do revenue projections that deal with whether we remove the capital improvement and debt service from the calculation of a percentage, and how that would impact, say, the budget most recently adopted. If we removed capital improvement and debt service. There are, it is an arbitrary number when you have 2%, and I'm old enough to remember 18% inflation when Jimmy Carter was president. Not his fault, of course.
It was just
So if you had a 2% number in there and the inflation rate went to 18%, you would not only be, you wouldn't just be in trouble, you'd be bankrupt. You'd be unable to perform the services required of a municipality. You'd be unable to pay your employees, et cetera, et cetera. So the 2% is in my mind not a very good approach. But I don't know exactly what's better. You can look at a Social Security COLA adjustment. I think if you use the state the increase in the state budget, that lots of people, maybe including me, would go nuts, because that's not something we view as the most fiscally responsible budget increase annually, and I think locally we'd have a lot of problem with that.
So your thoughts to have the treasurer finance director run some scenarios?
Yes.
Yeah,
That would make sense to me.
So what do we want to have her specifically run? Because she is going to be coming to our April, whatever that date is.
Oh, the
Yeah.
21st.
if she could run scenarios that, taking the most recently adopted budget, to leave the CIP and the debt service out of the calculations, to treat them separately.
Okay.
Have her run what, 8%?
What, run 8%?
As one of the scenarios.
Well, sure.
That's what I'm saying. Let's narrow down exactly what we're going to have her do.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, run again the 2% and see where that leaves us. Run, if she can find the numbers for the Social Security cost of living adjustment annually, or some other widely used gauge of inflation.
She might even have a suggestion because of her knowledge of.
And any suggestions she might have is fine, I would think.
She was part of those discussions in CIP, I'm sure she has ideas.
Jason?
While considering other potential options, maybe don't limit yourself to just one. Maybe do something that is the greater of or lesser of two potential scenarios. So it's either I'm making this up, this is just out of nowhere, a 3% increase or the average CPI over the last 5 years. You know, pick a number.
Yeah.
And use those as kind of to give yourself a floor and a ceiling.
Okay.
I think we can afford to look at whatever.
Yeah, and anything she has, of course.
Anything would be better.
Just a question, if we remove the debt service and the CIP from the cap, is there going to be any constraint on those numbers? Because we'd like them to be unconstrained, obviously, but the voters are probably not going to like that idea. So should we consider putting some constraint on those?
We still go to town meeting.
There's,
Go ahead, you can answer.
there still are restraints on those numbers. You still have to go through a town meeting process. For certain things, you have to go to referendum. So there remain restraints on that. And debt service, anytime you get a bond, you have to go to referendum. So there's a constraint on that as well.
Okay.
And if you want to ask that without objection, we can hear from members of the audience.
I think it's better to be interactive and take questions as we're working on something.
I wanted to throw something out there about the 3 budget referendums. When, as a school system, if we were to not set a budget, I realize that 3 sometimes hurts us, but on the flip side, if we were to go to an extended time period and start a school year and not know what our budget is, and have to lay people off into a school year when we already have classrooms organized, it's a very disruptive thing if we don't have a budget set before the school year starts.
There's a tremendous
And in
advantage.
hiring, to be able to hire the people that we may need. So through the summer, you always get some turnover. People leave to get new positions, move up in the world, whatever. Our hands would be tied in terms of being able to hire people until we had a budget settled. So if you guys could just consider that in there. I'm not advocating 3, but I'm saying there's a flip side to going unlimited as well. That really would be detrimental.
With the CIP, I'm just trying to think in my head, if we were to separate it from the debt service, how would that work? I'm being kind of dumb here, I'm sure. But I'm trying to figure if you're not putting the 2, in other words, if the way it's been, you get the 2%, you spread, everybody gets 2%, that's the way it is, whether they ask for it or not. That's what everybody's getting. If we separate the CIP, would that be voted separately then, or?
No,
Okay.
just the budget to be presented when the budget was, if the budget failed 3 times, then you'd do whatever adjustment you were going to do, but you wouldn't do anything to the CIP or the debt service. Those would be separate.
So,
The other thing we might want to look at and ask the treasurer to look at is making the 2%, as I think has been suggested, making the 2% apply to the tax increase as opposed to the spending increase.
But again, I think eventually you'd run into the same problem because I think those scenarios are going to be more important. They're going to tell us what it really looks like to do it a different way. Because even with the 2%, whenever we're putting a percent number in there, we're tied to that.
Yeah.
And there could come a year where we want to spend more, and, the revenue comes in, but I'm just trying to think it through on that.
Well, theoretically in a democracy, you convince people to spend that money. You convince people to, that it's in their best interest to do that.
Oh.
So
In democracy, you don't
there's
have
an
a
element
limit.
of being democratic, small d democratic, and the other element is being able to operate responsibly and fiscally responsibly and prudently. And so Kathy's point of having a finite end to the process at least gives us some clarity in which people can operate. But the other, you can't legislate that the voters are always going to approve increases in a budget. You just can't do it. And still, consider yourself a, quote, small d Democrat.
Right. I agree that so you're left with the choice of the unlimited votes, which doesn't work, but I think we need to see those scenarios because there's got to be a better number that it's not tied to a percentage, it shifts with the economy, it shifts with, we do everything else we do when we hire or we negotiate contracts. We look at what's gone on in other towns, et cetera. And there's just, to me, there's got to be one better way, or maybe 2, and we just choose the better of the 2 evils, or do an and/or type of thing,
One thing I didn't like about the 3 referendums is there were people voting no just to vote no. They knew they only had to vote 3 times for it. So there's, that was the con of that one too. So I'm not completely set that we don't need the unlimited. I
See
don't
where
know
you're
either.
coming from.
Well, and then you get when you have that 2% just out there, there's misinformation. People in parts of town think they're paying more taxes than they are. There's a lot of misinformation. Even with the 2% application, I remember we had a problem one year applying the 2% because we weren't sure how to apply it. I think we had to go back and get I'm not against the number, but I want it to be based on something. And the treasurer can track that. The finance director.
Alan?
Also in the interest of keeping it simple, I mean, 2% was an arbitrary number, and we found with use of it, it hasn't worked. But, you know, we have had some successful budgets in the 3-ish range and whatnot, and I was wondering if maybe one of the things we should look at is look at what were the numbers that have passed, and, you know, so those were obviously palatable to enough people to pass a budget, and then try to set that percentage, keeping the, whether it's 3 or 2, I'm thinking 2 is potentially enough votes. But, you know, again, borrowing from, I guess, Kathy Billy was thinking of 10%, not really going to the extreme, but saying, if you came in somewhere at say, you know, if everything fails, it's going to be 3, or something in that, that gives you the opportunity to put in a budget at 2.75. And, you know, that you might feel is responsible. Or, you know, or getting there somewhere close, but it's above that 2%, it's not getting out of hand, you know, and it's giving, you know, last time we went through this, I graphed, you know, a bunch of comparable towns, mill rates and ours, and what the 2% does is it gives us this, where other towns are like this, and I think business doesn't really want to have a 0.9 this year and a 7 next year. You know, if you know, they can deal with, okay, it's 3 1/4 is going to be, you know, basically what it is, I can deal with that kind of thing, or, you know, whatever that number is, but, you know, maybe we could base it on what has been successful in the past and just bring it up. And again, it's somewhat arbitrary, but it's based on some of the data that we have, you know, what we've experienced in the last 10, 15 years,
12 years.
The Social Security number that they use comes out during the year. So it's not an annualized number. They pick 3 months and they average those and give us a number because we're old and we don't know any better. The WPCA uses an annualized number. That doesn't come out until January, but January is far before the budget season. And it is a complete average of the entire 12 months. And so you get a more accurate picture of the previous year, assuming that the previous year is the one you want to use.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a given, but the number tends to be a little different. I can't tell you whether it's higher or not. I don't know that answer, but that is a totally different number than what Social Security uses. And I think they do it in a very nice hidden way that we don't know what they're doing, and they just tell us, which is a totally different world. So the annualized number comes out in January, and that's what we use by contract at the WPCA, and everybody's happy with it so far.
Okay. So I have a pretty decent list for the treasurer to run. She will be here at our April 7th meeting, so that'll give her roughly a month to run those numbers and get that together, so I can send that email out to her.
Yeah,
And
I
then
think that's
I think
the
we'll
way
go
to
from
do
there. I
it.
think that's-
I think that's right, get a bunch of scenarios run and.
Yeah, I think we
Yeah.
need to get that before we can kind of make any other decisions about this.
I'd suggest we send it to the first selectman and he can forward to his.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll second that. There was a motion, right?
What other part of 8 did we want to look at tonight?
There's something about CIP in here, wasn't
The dates for the series.
Yeah, I have it.
there?
It was in the beginning.
Teach me.
8-4.
Oh yeah, 8-4A.
3.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Kathy, in your experience, how much time would you need realistically to be able to pull up all the numbers?
So our meeting schedule is typically 2 to 3 nights for presentations, and then 2 to 3 nights to deliberate, to discuss the projects and come up with a priority ranking order and develop the priority list.
60 days.
So you're looking at like 6 meetings to do that probably over the course of what is now about a month and a half. It doesn't really cut it. And then I have to write it all up afterwards, or whoever is the chair has to write it all up and put it in a format for the Board of Selectmen. So I would say at least another month. Like if we could get to the 1st of December, I feel like that's pretty reasonable. And I think it's still before a lot is going on in town hall with budgets. Jason can certainly answer that, but
December 1st would be more than workable.
Question. It says you're supposed to have, and I've not served on CIP, so I don't know how it works, that you're supposed to be ready for fiscal years afterwards as
Yeah.
well?
we do talk about that, yeah. We have requests come in that go out as much as 5 years. So, so while I present this year to the Board of Selectmen typically, there's often a lot of the projects go out, like the fire truck. They asked us for $2 million a year for 5 years. The Board of Ed gives the town a book of all the projects that need to be done that go out, and they prioritize them out over 5 years or more. Some of the other departments typically don't have requests that go out further unless it's a very expensive thing that they're spreading out, like the fire truck. So it kind of depends. Yeah. So it kind of depends on the department and what it is that their general needs are.
So do you put that into your budget and say this is an ongoing year budget number, or?
So when we build our spreadsheet, it basically says this is the total price of a project, and this is like how much they've requested, or how much we're gonna allocate in a given year.
Okay,
So you
get
can
it.
see what the balance is to finish the project.
Got it.
Some projects are one-year projects though, and other projects are longer term. And then there's projects that don't even make the list because they're out 5 years. We kind of sum them up, but we don't really talk about them a ton.
Okay.
We look at them and know they're there and try to deal with we know we can't cover what we get for this year. So there's only so much planning you can do 5 years out when you can't cover this year. Like, we keep kicking the can. I mean, the Board of Ed's been submitting the same projects for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
They're not done yet.
So you're looking at something like December 1st of each year?
That would be helpful.
Is that A, capital improvement budget, number 3 is what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
The last line.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
And the rest of the time frame is good for that, having the committee established before August, and then having all of the information from all the boards and stuff for September.
Yeah, I wouldn't ask them to do it any earlier. They're
Okay.
barely just kind of getting rolling.
Yeah.
Is there
They
any?
just got their last budget figured out, and they're kind of got it in place to start to look at the next year.
Okay.
Trying to do it any earlier for that, I think, for them is difficult.
Is there any negative to doing it December 1st? I'm just asking.
Not from my
Not on
perspective.
our end, no.
Well, I don't know. I've not been on CIP. I don't know. I don't know if Board of Selectmen have a problem with it.
I don't have a problem with it. The budget process started late this year, but even if it were starting a normal process in the absence of a change in administration, budgets wouldn't be due to the first selectman's office till sometime in December anyway.
If we had the same budget time frame as when everybody else does, that would be helpful. Even it doesn't have to be earlier. I don't know why it's so much earlier. It never made sense to me because nobody looks at it. I
Yeah.
mean, I go through this huge rush to get it in, and then nobody looks at it for months, it seems like, so. I know this year, I didn't get it to Jason until second week or end of the first week, first half of December sometime.
And that caused me absolutely no disruption.
Thank you, I'm glad.
So we can either do December 1st or mid-December? I mean,
January 1st?
About December 31st.
I think the end of December would start to cause a disruption because there is information that needs to be compiled prior to the,
Prior to that?
yeah.
Well, when do the rest of the, is there a date certain when the rest of the departments have to?
The
all the-
Board of
Yes,
Selectmen
September.
establishes the date, it's typically sometime in December.
Okay.
If that deadline were to, for the CIP were to be December 1st, that's not at all prohibited.
But the CIP, according to this, has to gather all its information by September 15th. That means you have end of September, October, and November if we go to December 1st.
Or, I mean, it could be flexible and just be when the rest of the town departments are due, and we'd find out what that was when the date was set.
That would work too.
That would work for me as well.
okay.
All I know is I don't think we've made the November 1st deadline, ever.
So it'd be nice to change it
Sometimes,
for no
but
other
not
reason.
ever really on November 1st.
We've never had departments that were ready.
That makes sense though.
Well,
If they're not ready, they don't have their stuff together, then
Well,
how
they
can you
get
do
the
your
stuff
thing?
into the town hall, and then they have to make the books and the copies and all the stuff, so the town hall needs a week to get stuff ready, and then, so by the time it gets to us,
You
it's
guys are
already
done.
the end of September.
Yeah. Okay.
I think for charter purposes, it would need a date. Am I wrong on that? Like, just to have it clear? So if we were to say December 15th, would that make sense?
I think that the town department thing is spelled out in there someplace else, that the Board of Selectmen sets the date for all of the budgets to be due, and you could just roll it into
You
that.
could include it in
Then
there.
it would have a
Right.
date certain.
Okay.
It just wouldn't be a fixed date certain, it would be at the discretion of the board to set that each year.
You guys did just say that.
We can just take that language from that section and just
Just, yeah, roll it
roll it
into
into
that
that,
instead
yeah.
of.
I wonder why they changed that from others similar.
Yeah, that's what has me confused. It's like, why is it?
Maybe because they're the only committee that's supposed to be planning 4 years out by charter,
That's a state requirement, actually.
that the
Yeah.
CIP is 4
Well, and whenever we're
5-year
bonding,
capital
we have to
plan.
be able to provide a 5-year prospectus when we bond, so Amy and I keep that list current.
So I wonder if there's a date involved with the state statute on that. If that's a state requirement that they do things by certain times, maybe that's where
Do you
that
submit
date
anything
comes
to the
from.
state?
It's only, it's a state requirement that a town have a 5-year capital plan. I don't know if there are submissions required, I doubt it.
Okay.
But towns are required to have a 5-year capital plan.
Yeah.
And like I said, we needed it to go for bonds,
Yeah.
so that's, so it stays up to date.
Okay. I think that was the only section that was on CIP, and I think that we've accomplished a lot tonight, so you want to make a motion, right?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Jason, whenever you send me that digitally,